I'm curious, you were the creator of Chaos, and then you were also one of the founders of CentOS and then Rocky Linux. And this spans over a longer period of time. Was the experience of creating these projects very similar? Or as the ecosystem has been evolving, like creating Chaos versus creating Rocky Linux, was that completely different?
That is a really good question. So the goal of Chaos and CentOS was very different. But at the beginning, in the early days, a lot of the build tools and scripts and things that we created, infrastructure that we created around Chaos Linux, applied to what we were doing with CentOS. And CentOS was created because, and I think this might be an interesting story to tell, CentOS was created because Red Hat used to give away their operating system for free. So even though it was commercially controlled, it was freely available. They stopped doing that with the creation of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So Red Hat Linux, which was the freely available distribution, which all organizations at that point, maybe not all, but a lot of organizations, to the point you mentioned, Phil, was standardized on this because it met a huge amount of needs, and it was really enterprise focused, and professional IT teams worldwide just leveraged that. So when they end of lifed it, it affected what we were doing at Department of Energy at my lab, Berkeley Lab. And we said, well, we kind of need a solution here. And so we applied the same build scripts, methodologies, and tools, and a lot of the same even individuals that was working on Chaos to start rebuilding the Red Hat source RPMs. And at first, we weren't doing it to build an operating system. We were doing it to help us create Chaos Linux. We needed a build environment. We needed that core. And a lot of that core was shared with Red Hat to ensure a common unified base API. And so we were like, well, we still need to do this. So we started building the operating system. And at this point, Whitebox Enterprise Linux was released to the world. And Whitebox was a full rebuild of Red Hat Enterprise Linux sources. And it was created, I believe, if my memory serves, I believe it was created by John Morris. And John was overwhelmed a little bit. And I don't mean to put words in his mouth. He can definitely correct me on this. But it definitely felt like he was overwhelmed with the amount of attention that Whitebox Enterprise Linux got. And I reached out to him and I said, we're kind of doing something similar. We got this whole community. Should we join forces? And he said, this was a little bit overwhelming for what he was signing up to do. He didn't realize he was signed up to make an operating system for the whole world. So he said, if you want to just take over, please go right ahead. And so we ended up coming up with a name for what we were creating and called it CentOS, and released it to the world, and it just immediately took over. And as a result, it did dwarf what we were doing with Chaos Linux. And most people assumed that there was a lineage between Chaos Linux to CentOS. There wasn't truly a lineage, but that's how most people assumed. So most people then figured Chaos Linux now was done. It wasn't done, but we lost almost all of our inertia at that point. And it almost all that went over to CentOS. And then due to just how things evolved with CentOS, CentOS ended up leaving the Chaos Foundation, and there's a little bit of politics that occurred there and whatnot, as happens, fairly often. But we separated, and I was then no longer associated with it. But up until that point, I was the project lead of Chaos Linux. I was the director of the Chaos Foundation and the project lead of CentOS.